So my name is Daniel Riggs. I currently am in the U.S. Army. I serve as the S35, which is a fancy way of saying I have this job where I do all these random projects around for my battalion right now. A lot of it involves exercise and plan design. So that's currently what I'm doing right now. Before that, I was the senior instructor for the psychological operations officer qualification course, which is the only one in the United States Army's Defense Department who does that. So that's what I've been doing. And right now I'm waiting to go back to the force to kind of finish out my time in the Army. So I like to think of it kind of as a weird composite of um, like Terry Pratchett's Discworld. I like to think of it as a little bit of the weird altered carbon kind of like cyberpunk kind of future, and everyone will have Wes Anderson outfits, is probably what it's going to look like. I don't see it as necessarily like a final destination. It may be a place where, if you're visiting the Archipelago Design, it's a way station. You stop there. It serves as like maybe the cantina on Tatooine in the first Star Wars. It's where you find Han Solo and Chewbacca, but it's not like the final place where you're going to get all the wisdom. I say that because like a lot of what I'm interested in is very amorphous, and it's not necessarily anything that like academics would be particularly interested in. It's very much looking at, base or pop culture and looking at sort of irrational modes of action. I think that's the more interesting stuff. And that's what you would find on my island. And if you were thinking about it geographically, much of it's still unexplored, like much of my design thinking. So it's still a long way to go. Only I would say perhaps a tenth of the island has been discovered. There's still a lot more to come over the years. So stay tuned for the new contour lines and geographical features that you'll see. I would say one of the great things about design, it's not like mathematics where you're going to start at a certain point. I think that there's a number of different people you can start with, and that can be both, I think, liberating and terrifying, where there doesn't seem to be a real good start point and there doesn't seem to be an end point either. But I think that's a big part of design anyway. It's not particularly Newtonian in that sense, where you're going to start here at this causal point and end over here. So you're not going to start at A and end up at B. That being said, though, I know Ben is currently the editor, and because I'm working with him on it, is an enormous textbook where it's going to cover all of military design over, starting with Nave and even going back a little further to Soviet operational art and seeing how that has manifested today. But if you want to, the fun rabbit hole you can get started with is the arts and crafts movement, which started in England as a reaction to what was considered to be really crude manifestations of the Industrial Revolution. So you start there and it's very easy to see the process, how it goes from the arts and crafts to Art Nouveau down to Bauhaus. And then that translates into the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the MoMA, like taking up design and how it just proliferated in the United States. You can see then it'll lead you into horse riddle and so forth. So I think if you have a starting point, if you're just like, well, that's all great, you're speaking in these generalities about, oh, it's everyone's journey, but give me something. I would say maybe start there. And then that can take you into the full debate. It'll, get you to the D School of Stanford. It'll get you to all the innovations that have occurred in the 80s and 90s. And if you have to start somewhere, in the military design, I think Nave is a great, his texts are really dense, but if you were looking for, hey, where is like something accessible, something I could give my dad to understand, which is some of the reason when I write my articles, I try to have him in mind, like someone who doesn't know anything about the subject. Does he understand it? So if I'm giving it to my dad who knows nothing about design, if you're going to start with anyone, I would say, which is very accessible, start with Alex Ryan. And then from there, like either of those starting points, I think there's enough material that you get to discover for yourself. And I think that's a really fun part. I mean, part of my design journey right now is trying to find my own ways of doing design and looking at my own sources. And I'm sure we'll get into that later. If I was trying to sell you on design, I would say that as opposed to a lot of guys that and gals that typically look at a postmodern, influence and so forth, mine is looking at a very much pre-modern and aesthetics for means of design. And it's very much of a customer focus. So as opposed to sort of chasing, I would say, more abstract notions, I'm looking at things that have evolutionary staying power and that have influenced man and woman for millennia. That is how I look at design, is taking that huge swath of experience and that huge swath of instinct and using that to design things and plans and so forth that both resonate and both create impact. Though, that is not to dismiss any of the guys like Ben and Nave or Ofer Gracier or any of them, because they do incredible stuff from the influences of Foucault and others. But for me, I think that design ought to be holistic, and I'm looking at going and doing something that predates Newton or any of those people, any of the modernists, and actually looks at very primal things for what influences us. All right, well, I'm enlisted, so that's a huge difference right off the bat. So people like Grant Martin, Ben, Chris Paparone, they're all Grant's still an officer in the Army. Ben was a colonel. Chris Paparone was a colonel. A lot of the guys are higher up in officers, so they've had that experience and those expectations. Unfortunately for me, coming into the design community, I'm more, I guess, like Rodney Dangerfield from Caddyshack, where I'm just like the boorish outsider in a sense. So that is a difference. Like, I'm far more base than any of these guys. The other big difference, I think, is I'm not as wedded or interested necessarily, though I can appreciate the impact and influence of continental philosophy. So, your Hegels, your Kants. I'm not particularly interested in, Foucault or Derrida or any of those guys. Part of it is I've heard some very good explanation of it already. I think it's already been covered well enough. And I don't know what I can add to Ben Zwiebelson's, work on, incorporating postmodernism in design. I think he has that very well covered. So it would be a bit of a redundancy, and it doesn't necessarily grab me in that same way. I think I'm one of the few that doesn't come from, I had combat arms. So I served as a sniper back in the day, but I left that for psychological operations, which is decidedly less, it's a dumb word, but we'll use it anyways, kinetic. So leaving sort of that kinetic space where I've definitely been immersed in, better understanding of the information environment and the implications of that, just because the people I work with, we exhaustively talk about it all day. I had this earlier, was really having trouble with it because there have been some uses of design that have been, very effective at the tactical level. But unfortunately, right now, design, at least at the military level, has faced rather an uphill battle. Now, there's a lot of things that we should also say this about design is just because it got named and we kind of categorized it with certain words and so forth in the mid-90s and so forth, doesn't mean people weren't doing design thinking. We didn't necessarily call it that, but it was that, right? So anytime you're seeing people radically reconceptualize their relationship with their environment in such a way that they're breaking it down to first principles on almost like an atomic scale and really decoding everything and, finding patterns and delineating delineating between the data, I would say that's a huge part of design. So I have an example of writing in a paper right now about the OSS, or sorry, not the OSS, the SAS. So the British Special Air Service. So they're, today you say it was like kind of the cool guy operators, but you look at this book cover for Rogue Heroes, and if you took away the title and you covered up all of the insignia on their uniforms, it honestly looks like it could be a punk band from the 80s. They're guys that do not look like they fit into the mold. I don't know if they would be able to get into SAS today because of how different they are. In their first major assignment in North Africa, they're tasked with, we need you to mess up the Luftwaffe, and we need you to interdict, as much of Rommel's forces as you can. So the big problem in the desert at that time in Algeria is the vastness of it. I think that I don't know why, and this is probably my own Western ignorance, is at times I forget how vast Africa is. I don't know, for some reason on the map, it just does not seem like, it's like, oh yeah, it's like Texas, it's just one side or the other. But it's so mammoth, and it's like oceans are basically on it. And that's essentially what that was. It was just almost a giant ocean. So that was the problem set. And, they reconceptualized that problem. It wasn't a desert they were facing. Who they were is they were like, oh, wait, we're kind of like Vikings. And the kind of distance and the considerations are the same as the Vikings when they were doing raids against the English. So they didn't think of themselves as soldiers. They were like, okay, we're on these small little boats, just like the Vikings, but in this case, they're jeeps. And we have these vast areas where we're not going to get any supplies, and we're going to be in perilous situations. Let's think about and look back to, 1,000 years ago for how people were doing it then. And in fact, that's what they did. They discarded airborne infill, as their first operation was a total failure that way. And they got with the long range reconnaissance group and used them as an essential taxi service to ferry them in and out, because that's what it was. The desert was the ocean. They were the Vikings. And that ability to have some kind of metaphoric reasoning and even humble themselves to think beyond their own immediate concerns, I think is a huge impact of design. Someone may argue with me on that, but I really think that's what it is can you stop, shake your brain up a little bit and get out of your own paradigm in order to, and I know people at the Archipelago won't like this, but think more objectively about the problem set, think more holistically about it. That's where you're going to get the solutions, is stopping and taking a breath and just thinking outside of these were the mechanical things that, produce success. So I think there is a lot of people, I think they're terrified of it, but I think a lot of our traditional boundaries and so forth are breaking down. I think there's more and more frontiers. I think that we are becoming more and more siloed in some ways, but I think we're breaking apart as well. At least that's the experience in the US. I can't really speak to where you are in Canada and how that is. I'm kind of a reflection of not just America, but currently the American South. So I can't necessarily, it is for the whole world, but it seems to me that things are breaking down in such a way, by the internet and so forth, and other people's experiences with, COVID, where the huge things that are holding us together will no longer sustain us in the future, unless they're radically reimagined and revitalized in some kind of way. And I don't see that kind of effort being done for either religion or science or anything. So I think there's a certain terrifying nature of the world going forward, where we don't have any of these markers, where we have a pretty good idea of where we're going. If you think of it like the end of a movie, right now, I think that we're all kind of at the back of that bus. If, this is an older movie, but I think it's still a great example, is in The Graduate. So our protagonist gets the love of his life, and he absconds with her away from the wedding, and they escape into this bus and they're off, right? And that's usually where the credits could end, but it doesn't. I think Milos Forman does an excellent job and showing right after that, Dustin Hoffman, who plays Ben Braddock in it, his face just kind of goes a little pale, kind of white. Like, yes, I kind of have succeeded, but I don't know what the future is. So I think for us, even someone who, like myself, who's very enthusiastic about it, is I have no clue what's going to happen. There seems to be breakdowns. There seems to be fissures. And that's why I think design is appropriate for this future, is you cannot be wedded to anything that necessarily has worked in the past, because I think with, our new technologies and so forth, it's going to overturn them quicker than we can even imagine. And as far as me, like working on items, I had mentioned it earlier, but definitely looking at examining, what's the melding of commercial and military design, and I'm looking at that through aesthetics. And I know that sounds like very broad and vague, but I'm still working it out in my mind how it's actually going to look. And the other big project is, looking at whether or not our current institutions, at least in the US, can't speak to other countries like Canada, but our US institutions favorably positioned to deal with complexity. So far, my hypothesis on it is it's not, and it has to change in radical ways to actually accommodate for complex adaptive systems. For me, design is it's getting outside of your own head just for a little bit. It's not just your independent armchair thinking. Design is collaborative. Design is dynamic. And by collaborative, I mean very like incorporating holistic, diverse opinions into it. Not just yourself coming to the solution as the grand genius, but having that group of people around that you come to conclusions together. The best part, I think, of design is my dad said this quote where, he was talking about when he graduated from Princeton. He's like, I was in awe of my circumstances, not of myself. And I think the best design environments and what design can and should be is when you're in awe of your circumstances, like those people around you, the institutions you're with. There's a reason I'm very psyched to be with Archipelago of Design, because I think there's that constant chance for you to be in awe of your circumstances. I mean, I can reach out to Grant Martin or Ben or a number of other people, and they have a tremendous amount of knowledge and experience with that. And I'd like to think one day that other people could, view me in the same way, that I could exist as such a resource to people that come in 10 years after I do. In terms of misconceptions about design, to get to the other part of the question. So I keep going back to US Army and that thing, but it's kind of what I know. And I'll give the example of it. So when I was taught initially about design by someone down here in North Carolina, he had mentioned that, okay, when you're doing design, and he meant design was Army design methodology. It wasn't design writ large, like all the different schools that there are. So it's like, well, design is just, it's your pre-step before you do any planning. But design isn't just your pre-step for planning. Design is something that needs to be happening, before, during, and after any kind of events. It's not just, step 0 before you hit step 1. The other thing is it's not just it's not a self-licking ice cream cone, and it's not navel gazing either. I was talking to a guy from the Joint Special Operations University a few weeks ago, and we were talking about design, and he's really big into operational design, which is just fancy word for planning. And he mentioned that, design's great, but ultimately, what's the utility? And we can get into that, them being victims of the utility monster, like Robert Nozick talks about. But the product that design provides planners is an opportunity to understand the system, to actually design or actually write a plan that reflects that system, where it's outside of any of just their rationalist paradigms, that it shows them something that's maybe nonlinear, that shows them something that's like quirky, and it shows something to them that's not just, lines of effort across a campaign plan. It could be something bizarre. It could be a tornado. It could be Legos. It could be anything, but it helps excites things in people that aren't otherwise able to get there. It helps draw out those thoughts that may be buried there. It helps actual innovative solutions come out. Planning won't do that. Planning is prescribed. It's going to tell you how to get there, but it doesn't tell you, and it doesn't give you an opportunity to have a good start and a good conceptualization of that. I don't know. Maybe I was at like the beginning of Dante's Inferno, like wandering through the woods, lost and so forth, in like September of 2019. But I think for me, one of the biggest overcoming adversity, and I think this is more important than any, whether it was, I don't care about, I overcame cancer a few years ago. I don't really care about that. But finding my place in the world in design and finding out who I am, I think that has been one of the biggest obstacles I've overcome, is committing myself to sit down and be humble-ish. I still have to always temper it, but sitting down and committing myself to writing and making myself accountable for my opinions and trying to expand on them and trying to understand why these ideas drive me, and if they're of any utility, if they're rational, if they produce. So having a little bit of the courage to initially submit articles to Small Wars Journal. And that courage ultimately has paid off in some ways. Danny Gomez, who works with Ben Abelson down at the Joint Special Operations University in Design, had seen this article I'd written. And I guess it was like, I didn't really know about design. I mean, I just wrote this article on why we needed to incorporate Dungeons and Dragons and world building into our exercises in terms of like mechanics and storytelling and all this. And Danny loved it. And he, when I met him, when he was with instructors serendipitously, we met and he's like, "You wrote that article?" I was like, yeah, it was a lot of fun. So I think one of the biggest obstacles is overcoming our fear that we're going to look stupid. And, writing can be it exposes you quite a bit, because you're like, well, these are my well-formed opinions. This is what I really feel. And no one wants to be, called stupid or think that, they didn't do the right, that they're, that all these things they work so hard for, that these beliefs that give them, their basic movement in life are corrupted or they're wrong. So I think overcoming my own personal ego and willing to put myself out there has been the biggest obstacle, and trying to develop the discipline. And, coming with writing, being humbled by some editors last year. I was initially like, "Oh, what the hell do they know?" It's like, well, they know a lot and you should shut up and listen to them. And that was after the fact. And now I love working with editors, because I know that ultimately my goal is to produce, some kind of essay, article, or whatever it is that, can maybe, hopefully, one or two people find some value in it. I would love for that to be the case. And I know that person in that collaborative spot can help me in that direction. So I think that biggest obstacle is, and I think this is for everyone, is like finding yourself. I mean, after college, I didn't know what I was doing. I think I drank every night when I was in DC. I don't think I did anything productive really for 2 years. And that's too bad, because I would say like your mind is at this really primed position where you had 4 years of or 3, is it 3 or 4? 4. Okay. So you had your 4 years of really rigorous education. And now your you have like, I would say, I think it was like 2 years, but you can read what you want now and like investigate what you want. You're not obligated necessarily to everyone. Yes, you have your responsibilities at work, but you're also in a position, I think, where you can really expand your own thought. For me, that's what happened when I left. After I graduated UCLA, was I started going to bookstores in DC. One of my favorite being Comma Coffee. It's just right outside DuPont Circle, and just going in the stacks of books and finding things and exploring thoughts and using that critical and creative thinking that was partially developed there and trying to maximize it to come to my own opinions. So I think that's, a wonderful thing for you going forward. And I would say for anyone else, like, keep continuing that. I stopped when I should have kept pursuing, whether that was writing or pursuing something else that was intellectually satiating and intellectually rewarding. I didn't. I stopped there. I went in the Army and I turned off my brain for probably 8 years. And I do regret doing that. But, you can't, there's no crying over spilled milk or anything like that. I'm not necessarily making up for time, but I'm thankful that I'm in the position I am now where I can, do interviews with this and be involved with something I never thought I'd be involved with, like some Canadian thing. Like, my grandpa's probably rolling over in his grave, but whatever. Probably my biggest accomplishment is the fact I've had 2 kids after testicular cancer. I'd say that's pretty dang good. Like Army wise, I've had some very nice awards here and there. I've had some McClure awards. I've been personally recognized by, let me say that again, personally recognized by generals for certain articles I've published. They're all those really nice things, but I don't, even if I feel like I've done something good, I keep looking to the future. And whether that's looking towards something that's may or may not be there, like some platonic form of success, I'm not really sure what that is, but I know that, any success I've had, one of my problems is probably not fully appreciating it at the moment or not acknowledging it. And then there's the problem of when someone asks you this question, it should be pretty easy and you should be, modest and have enough self-esteem to recognize and be able to say it, but you don't. So, maybe in the future, better accounting of that would be an actual success instead of just babbling nonsense. But I think larger successes, if what I'm looking for in the future is being able to sustain myself both intellectually and financially in some way where I'm doing some kind of creative work and outside of the Army. I think that would be my ultimate professional success. And then, my kids, ensuring that, whatever path it is there, that is the most emotionally and intellectually satisfying thing for them. It's definitely taught me how much of most of us are real social animals. I weirdly, and this could be like some Aspergery thing or something, but I did not mind the isolation as much. Now I think that's a rare person. Now my brother, for instance, he is possibly one of the more gregarious, I think he requires it as much as oxygen, is social interaction. He was so thankful, I think like 2 months ago, that he was able to go sit next to a stranger at a bar. That sounds like a horrifying prospect for me. But like for a lot of people, we realize that how much, if certain relations have fallen to the side, it's like, well, you realize how important ones they are when you're essentially deprived the ability to interact with people. I don't know if there's anything, unfortunately, valuable to say about, vaccines or public health. It's so politicized one way or another. I find the entire conversation to be so mundane to a point. But I think has given us a greater appreciation of, of our relations and how we need to keep them up. It's also hopefully been a time for people to re-examine, where they want to live, who they want to interact with, and what they want their job to be. I found it to be a productive time for me intellectually, and I knew I needed to harness that while it existed. So I think it teaches us all that, you need to establish at least a modicum of independence for yourself. And this isn't like, trying to be some like crazy, what do they call them? Like sovereign citizens. I'm not saying you become a sovereign citizen and you go off and write like the Unabomber's Manifesto, but finding an ability to sustain yourself in the worst of times is absolutely critical. I mean, this generation, it's not the deprivation of the Great Depression in terms of material items, but emotionally and socially it has been. And, we have to, okay, the rules are the rules. If they're going to shut things down, how do you find a way to still sustain yourself emotionally and work beyond that?